Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's session discussing Article Writing 101, hosted by the National Contract Management Association. My name is Jody Leon, and I will be the moderator for today's presentation. Please use the chat window to communicate with each other and with your host behind the scenes. Myself and Leah are here to assist you. Please use the Q&A box to ask questions to our panelists. Q&A will be answered throughout the session, but again, if you have any questions for our speakers today, please put them in the Q&A feature. The slide deck for today's webinar is already available and is in the chat window for you. Next slide, please. This presentation is for informational purposes only. The views and opinions expressed here are those of the presenters and do not necessarily reflect the position of NCMA. Next slide. It is now my pleasure to introduce your host for today's webinar, Anne Laurent. She is Contract Management Magazine Editor-in-Chief, an experienced magazine writer and editor with 37 years experience writing and leading publications about the federal market, federal management, and procurement and acquisition. And the webinar is now yours.
Thanks so much, Jody. Hi, everybody. Thank you for Jody for the little introduction, telling people that I'm old. That was very, very kind of you. Thank you. Actually, I gave her the years, so it's my fault. I'm here today to talk to you about something that is a great love of mine. Having spent all the years that I have producing magazines, working with writers and editing and writing myself. I love to talk about what we do, how we do it, sort of the magic involved in making magazines. So our learning objectives today, I hope you'll walk away knowing how this magazine that you all receive gets made every month. What makes a compelling article pitch for the magazine, why we love story, how we create stories that inform and educate and engage, and what it's like to actually conceptualize and write a story for the magazine. So first off, we're going to talk about what magazines are. Then we're going to talk about what makes up an issue of our magazine. And then we're going to talk about why we seek and relish stories, which is a particular kind of article. What are they and how to make them? So magazines, I love magazines. I grew up looking at magazines. My father was an advertising man. He worked for a company that sold fishing tackle and golf equipment, and he must have received every magazine that was ever published, all of them, of course, looking for him to buy advertisements in them. And so I got to read magazines from being a very little girl, and they were then and have been since my very favorite way of reading and learning about the world. For me, magazines are the epitome of the alchemy of words and images. Now, what is alchemy? If you'll recall from, I don't know, high school probably, alchemy was this belief that you could mix things up and turn them into something, or take lead and make it into gold. Sometimes it refers to throwing a bunch of rags in the corner and waiting for some being to emerge from them. But the bottom line is it's a creative experience, right? It's as it says here, these are definitions from various different dictionaries: a power or process that changes or transforms something in a mysterious way, right? Seemingly magical process of transformation, creation, or combination, a process that is so effective that it seems like magic. And to me, that's what magazines are. We take words and we take images and we turn those words into pictures in your mind and those pictures into words. And we do so in a way that leaves room to convey ideas and the context of those ideas. The traditional definition of a magazine is it's a periodical that presents multiple articles. It doesn't really differentiate it from a newspaper, but magazines are much more magical than newspapers, even nowadays when many, if not most of them, are online as opposed to something that you hold in your hand. So that's the reason that I love them. There is magic in them. And so let me show you a few pieces of that magic from our own magazine. As you can see here, every image that we choose in order to amplify the meaning of a story, or to the message of a story, or to play off of the story, or to enrich it, or to enliven it. And what could be more enriching, enlivening than animals flying, leaping, wandering, and staring at you from the page from this month's October issue, which is focused on leadership. The theme of it is building leaders. Here's another illustration that we put with a story that's based on a series of stories from a series of stories that are based on Aesop's fables. This particular Aesop's fable was about the man and the satyr. The satyr is a mythical beast that's part man and part ram, as you see here. The story of the fable is that the man and the satyr, a man and a satyr, lived together very happily. And one day in the winter, they were walking outside in the cold, and the man blew on his fingers to warm them up. And then later, when they got inside, the man blew on his soup to cool it down, and the satyr became incensed and left because the man blew or breathed both hot and cold. So that's the reason we chose the image, and the image is worked. The image and the fable are worked through that story. Sometimes we use humor. Here on the left, you'll see that, we were running a story about the defense budgeting and how it stymies innovation and slows things down. And so what better image for that than a tortoise with a camouflage shell. The other one over here, your contract is a refuge in a stormy world, pretty much speaks for itself. But when you open the story this way, you put people in a certain mindset, a certain mind frame for receiving the information that's coming within that story. Here's a great example where we took a key element of the story, which was William Roper, who was the Assistant Secretary for Acquisition Technology and Logistics of the Air Force, having gone to the CIA to stand in front of the ox cart A12, I believe it was, to get his picture taken on its final day in that job. And we used a real ox cart, but both are real ox carts actually, but flying across the sky to introduce the notion. And we carried it through with his actual photograph up here in the corner. Sometimes, many times actually, because we don't have photographers, we have to rely on photography that's sometimes not terrific. This was actually taken using a cell phone, so it had to run very, very small, which is one of the reasons we decided to expand on the size of it for the opening art that you see before you, and then play on that by talking about supersonic contracting. The ox cart was like the SR-171, a supersonic airplane, 3 times the speed of sound it could fly at, 90,000 feet in altitude, and it was created to take pictures, spy pictures over what was then the Soviet Union. So each of these choices that we make to merge images and words and make something new out of that combination, to me, justifies the notion that it's alchemy. Here, we also try to use humor when we can, and you get the point, I'm sure, with my explaining it much further. But again, this is a beautiful layout. It's just rich. It's got gorgeous color. It has humor. It catches your eye, that bright orange down there in the bottom. It leads up into the story. And it's a story that's kind of serious. So there's a nice play between humor and seriousness here as well. So magazines communicate with you on many, many different levels. Our magazine is Contract Management Magazine. It's a monthly, as you know. What are we trying to do with our magazine? Well, its intention is to be a lively, engaging, informative, educational, practical, useful, professional magazine for you who work in government and industry contracting. So I'm going to take you through and show you some of the things that we employ as we put together the magazine. So first off, obviously, here's the cover. What are we doing on the cover? You'll probably have noticed that over the last couple of years, we have been trying to put actual practitioners on the cover, particularly leaders in the contracting field, both from industry and from government. That represents a key element of this organization, which is that it is a neutral platform where industry and government contracting professionals meet and can work together and learn about each other and collaborate with one another. So we have tried to personify that, if you will, right there on the cover of the magazine. We also feature at least 3, sometimes even more stories across the top to give you a sense for what's inside and hopefully lead you to open the cover and look at what's inside. So here you have the current cover with Daryl Scott, who is a very well-known person within the federal market, both on the industry side and the government side. He's worked in contracting on both and been a leader on both sides. And so he was a great pick for our issue that's themed Building Leaders. Inside, the first thing that you are confronted with is either the Dear Readers column or the Dear Members column. In October, it was my great joy to be able to write a Dear Readers column. This is a chance for me to draw your attention to articles and explain why they are included or highlight interesting aspects of them, as I did here. That circle is around a section that talks about the story that's related to that one with all of the animals as its opening art. And in this little section, I reveal not only that there's a quiz that's related to the story about your leadership inclinations, but that I took the quiz. And in fact, I came up not an eagle as a leader, but in fact, as a hedgehog, which isn't terrible. And I also tell you that, most people who know me would agree that, like all hedgehogs, I pay less attention to means than ends in my leadership style. So the other alternative in this spot is a Dear Members column. And that's a forum for the NCMA president primarily, but also other members of the board, to alert, inform, and report to association members. And actually, this issue has a Dear Members before the cover in its digital form, because it's a call for you all to become more involved as volunteers for national committees for NCMA. So we sometimes mix things up. It's not always completely predictable. Inside, of course, is the table of contents. I call your attention to this because we have a set of regular departments that appear in the magazine. As you saw, there's the Dear Readers and Dear Members. There's the Innovations column, Clause Corner, the Legislative Regulatory Update, and there's also one called Council Commentary that runs every other month. Most of these are written by the same author each time they appear. However, the Innovations column, which I curate, is a welcome home for pitches for stories about successful uses of innovative acquisition techniques or innovative programs affecting contracting professionals and the like. So there is a place where you can pitch in order to write. So I encourage you to read the innovation columns, and if something strikes you that might be a fit, to propose, and I'll talk to you about those proposals or pitch a story idea. The rest of the table of contents shows you our features well. That's what the section of any publication where the main stories appear. It's a well. So we average 7 features in every one of our issues. On occasion, there are more, and depending if we're running something quite long, there are sometimes less. Each one of them at the top, you'll note, is tagged with the SIMBOK competencies that it exhibits. SIMBOK competencies are right there on the right-hand side going down in a column. And one of the things that we require is that you consider SIMBOK competencies as you are proposing articles for the magazine, and you suggest those that you believe the article you want to write will be touching upon or illustrating. And again, you note the use of images up there. Unfortunately, that one's truncated a bit so that I could show you the articles, but that image is the one that appears with the article we were talking about earlier. We put them inside of the table of contents to give you a taste of what's to come, and maybe to entice you to move more thoroughly through the magazine. The last page usually of the magazine is the editorial calendar. We run it every single issue, and it is the place, the home of the full listing of the themes of our issues. So it's a place where you can plan ahead if you wish to write for the magazine. You have an idea that fits in one of these themes, you might want to propose your article as being a good one, potentially for one of the themed issues. However, you need to know some information about the production of the magazine in order to do that. So today, it's Tuesday, October 18th, 2022. We just sent the November issue to the press on Friday. The December issue is in editing right now. Its story drafts were due from authors September 30th. We already have assigned all of the stories for the January issue, and the February issue stories are due to me on December the 5th. So from your proposal to write to a published story can take 5 months or more. And we, the staff, are working always on 3 issues at a time, at least. So we need you to be patient with us when you submit a proposal. It's just me responding to those proposals. So I'm also putting out the magazine at the same time, writing and editing all of the stories. So I'm slow to respond sometimes. I apologize. Actually, the entire staff consists of me, a contract magazine management firm, a design firm, and our volunteer editorial advisory board. So there's not a lot of folks behind the scenes here. So writing for the magazine. On our NCMA magazine website, or NCMA Association website, there is a resources tab. If you click on it, one of the choices below will be Contract Management Magazine. If you click on that page and you go to the bottom of the page, you will see much of what I'm going to present to you in the next several slides. So you will be able to go back to it there, even if you don't have these slides in front of you. So how long should an article be? If you want to write for us, we try to keep our pieces, the feature stories at the 2,500 words to 3,000 words level, and our columns, our shorter pieces, 1,500 words or so. But keep in mind, that's not a tremendous amount of space. With art, it's about 4 to 5 of the pages you saw in the magazine. So if you're going to propose an article, focus closely and sharply on the key idea or very few ideas that you want to transmit. How do you submit an article? Well, this is about how to write a pitch or a proposal. So you send your concept to us in outline form. We'll need a proposed title, a sentence or two encapsulating the topic, and your planned approach to it, the major points of the piece, and those competencies I was talking about that you'll be covering. Include a brief bulleted biography and send all of it to me. We will let you know whether you should go ahead with the article for our consideration. And if so, we will suggest changes that we might propose to the article. As you plan and write, there are some things that it would be helpful for us if you would please keep in mind. When you're writing for any magazine, even if it's a specialized audience that you're writing for, as with this magazine, it's important to have in your mind not the most specialized and expert person who might be reading the article, but rather someone who is smart, well-educated, knows about your subject matter, but is not an expert at it. That way, you will avoid some of the biggest pitfalls of writing, among them assuming too much of your readers or asking too much work of them. So in this case, please avoid jargon and unfamiliar technical terms when you can. Of course, you're going to be referring many times to parts of the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, or the DFARS. You might be quoting from various publications. That sort of thing is certainly acceptable. However, when you get deep into jargon, you may actually lose even some of your contract management colleagues. Not everybody is well read in every section of the FAR, every part of the FAR, let alone the more technical terms that arise perhaps in contracting for information technology, or for software, or for weapon systems, or for each of the deals that have to be struck by particular agencies for particular things or services. So explain your terms, use familiar terms. I always try to write as though I were writing for my mom, God bless her soul, because she was smart and well-educated and interesting and curious, but I didn't want her to not be able to understand my writing. And it's not a bad idea to write that way. Write for that well-educated person who's not long or deeply experienced in contracting, its rules and its methods. That way, your article will be accessible to the young entry-level or older entry-level contracting professional, the journeyman professional, and the expert. And that's really what we want. We want to be an inclusive publication. Make sure that it is enlightening and accessible and interesting across both commercial and government contracting, the buyer and the seller sides. We are an inclusive, large, open tent of contract management professionals at all levels of government and all kinds of industry. Some of it focused on government, well, much of it focused on government, but also not. And so we want our magazine to appeal to the broadest possible of our audience. Don't assume deep familiarity with the UCC, the FAR, or government contracting. Explain your terms and try to avoid that jargon. And you're much more likely to succeed with a proposal if it and its outline are as engaging, easy to read, and interesting as the article you plan to write. So do keep that in mind as well. When we get that article in Microsoft Word, by the way, and we all write in Word because it is particularly helpful in having a tracked changes function where you can see the edits that were made, and I can see your responses to those edits. So please write in Microsoft Word and familiarize yourself with tracked changes, because if we accept your article, you will get an edit and a copy edit, both of which will use tracked changes and will need you to communicate using tracked changes. When we get proposals, we evaluate, or I'm sorry, when we get articles that we have accepted, we evaluate them for readability, accuracy, and soundness of content, and currency and interest to readers. Those are the key areas. We'll let you know whether we intend to publish, and if we do, we'll give you a deadline for your final draft to come to us, and an estimated date, that is month of publication, right? Now, as I mentioned to you before, this is going to take some time because we get lots of proposals. I have to look at them, and very often I also send them to our editorial advisory board to get their assessment, particularly of articles that are highly, no, they shouldn't be highly technical, but are technical in nature. While I have covered procurement and acquisition for many of the 37 years I've been in this trade, I am not a contract manager, and I've not been educated as one. So I always try to rely on our editorial advisors for articles that, where we really need to be very strict about accuracy. And that process also takes time. So just be aware that there are lots of steps in the process, and be patient with us. Your accepted articles are professionally edited. I am a professional editor. Our magazine management company has professional copy editors. We have either myself or those copy editors do a proofread of your article once it is in pages, that is, and it's laid out. You will have an opportunity at every level to approve and to respond to those edits. So that's one of the great things that we provide. We give you a very solid professional editing experience. You'll get exposure to a large portion of the 20,000 or so members that in NCMA. They will see your work. It goes to all members. The magazine goes to all members. You'll become, by having been published, eligible for our annual Best Contract Management Magazine Article Award. And you'll get a voice in some of the most important contracting conversations of the day. There's no money exchanged, but the compensation that all of this compensation that most people that people receive, most of our authors are terrifically appreciative of. So if you ever have questions, please reach out to me. I will help you out. The editorial advisory board members run in the table of contents in our masthead. That's what this version of a magazine is called, every single month, so you know who they are. They are all people that you are likely to have heard about or have even seen speak at our events. They're people with terrific experience from across our audience, our membership, and the contracting world. So now I want to talk to you about perhaps the most important aspect involved in proposing to write for our magazine. Above all, we seek your stories. The real life tales of your experiences as practitioners, wrangling with tough problems, with demanding customers, with eager providers, complex rules, little time and limited funds, but still attempting new approaches, trying new solutions, faltering at times, then learning, then succeeding and delivering amazing outcomes. These are stories, real life stories. They are the most sought after of the articles that we run in the magazine, by me as an editor, but also by our readers. The response to actual stories in our magazine, stories that you, the practitioners, tell, is amazing and vastly more than any other kind of article. Well, why is that? Well, if you think about it, stories are the primordial means of human communication. They came first. When we, as a species, started to exist and wanted to communicate with each other, we told stories. How do I know? Have you ever seen pictures of cave drawings? If you have, you will note that those cave drawings tell stories. Group of people hunting, kill mastodon. That's a story. In their classic form, stories are about a hero, a challenge, a struggle, resolution, and a conclusion. But in that, they move us, they engage us, they thrill us, they surprise us, they frighten us, they rattle us, they make us laugh, they make us cry, they make us feel. Why? Because they draw us in, they put us in the picture, they put us in the action. They show us, they don't just tell us. What we learn from stories sticks with us. Contracting professionals tell us over and over again that they learn the most and mostly learn from on-the-job training. You already are in the story. So to help one another to do smart, efficient, fast, and still compliant things to make better deals that produce better outcomes, we all need to tell our stories, both successes and valued attempts. So let me give you an example from the story that you have on your screen right now. I was a staff officer in Kabul, Afghanistan in 2014 in the NATO Air Training Command Afghanistan, which was responsible for helping equip and train the nascent Afghan Air Force. This already tall order became a Herculean challenge when U.S. and coalition forces began planning to withdraw close air support aircraft from Afghanistan at the end of that year. By the time I arrived, smart officers already had been thinking about the problem and how it would affect the Afghan military, which had become accustomed to the effectiveness and speed of coalition air power. As the only close air support pilot in the organization, I had a unique perspective. My teammates and I worked to think critically about the problem, deconstruct it, and find a way to present it in an actionable format for decision makers. Earlier than we may have wanted, our commander scheduled us to brief the 4-star general overseeing the operation. We took a quick helicopter ride to military headquarters in Kabul. I found my seat at the long conference table. I would be the lowest ranking officer there by far. Marine General Joseph Dunford, the commander of U.S. and international forces in Afghanistan, had read the material beforehand and asked me to describe the problem. What's happened there? The writer put us in the picture in Afghanistan with his team in the helicopter at the table. He set up the challenge. He is the hero. Does he make you want to know what happened? I sure hope so, because he's with us today. Dan, come on aboard. Dan Manning is with us. He is the founder and chief story architect at a company he built called Build the Story. And what he specializes in is creating 3-minute stories that sell people, ideas, and things for entrepreneurs who are constantly being required to pitch, and particularly to pitch their wares and get in order to get money. He's an author of a book, but he's also an Air Force pilot, retired, and had lots and lots of experience overseas, and is one of the finest storytellers and the fastest that I have ever met. And I'm absolutely thrilled that he's able to join us today to talk about, okay, how do you write for this magazine? And how do you tell stories particularly? What are they? So Dan, I'm so thrilled to have you here, and I can't wait for you to start telling us what you have to say about your experience writing for the magazine, your article about problem telling, not storytelling, but problem telling to people in power, and also about story. I am a lover of narrative and story, and so are you. So I am thrilled to have you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation, and thanks for having a chance to share my passion about story with all of you. I will say, let's go back. Yeah, right there is fine. So I will say that my experience in writing for the magazine was fantastic. It was incredibly easy, incredibly professional, and an absolute thrill the entire way through. And I'm glad that now the magazine in this edition is getting out to the hands of your members. I'm looking forward to that feedback and that conversation. So I'm passionate about story because it works. It works as a communication tool. I'm not writing novels. I'm not writing screenplays. I'm using stories to get ideas from my brain into yours. And story is the most reliable, most effective way to do that. I do want to start, though, by talking about what a story is. And a lot of times, especially in marketing speak, things get called stories that aren't actually stories. And I'm not defining a story to be pedantic. I'm defining a story because if you want to take advantage of those deeply rooted pieces of our brain that connect back to story at the earliest times of humanity, if you want to connect to the way that neuroscience has found that stories work inside the human brain, if you want to connect to the impact that story has on our psychology, that makes us feel, that puts us in the moment, you've got to actually tell a story. When I talk about telling a story, this is what I say it is. It's a complete narrative about a character who meets obstacles on the way to achieving a goal. So let's break that down a little bit. When I say complete, I mean that the story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. That is, we use stories to make meaning. Humans are always going through life trying to take a look at the things that are going on around us and make meaning from those things. The story should make it as easy as possible to find that meaning. So the beginning, the middle, and the end means that I have all the pieces that I need in order to make meaning contained inside the story. Now, that doesn't mean that I would use exactly the same words when I tell the story to different audiences, right? Different audiences are going to bring their own experiences, and some audiences I would need to explain more about, maybe more about Afghanistan, or more about why we were flying in a helicopter to that place, or maybe some more detail about what it would look like inside of a military briefing room, for instance. But for this audience, those are all things that are very understandable. Every person reading has sat at one of those giant conference tables where you have the senior ranking person at the front of the table and you've got lower ranking people all around. I don't have to explain those concepts in this story because the audience already understands it. But I do need to make sure that everything that they need to be able to make meaning, to be able to understand what I'm going to be talking about in terms of problem telling, for instance, or speaking truth with power, is included in that story, so it's complete. The second is that I need to have a character, and this character has to have a relatable point of view. And this gets to exactly what Anne was saying about how stories allow us to be inside the story. You'll hear a lot of people who say that you need to tell a story where your customer, for instance, is the hero. But that's not exactly correct in my view. The person reading the story needs to be able to recast themselves into the story, into the starring role. So if I'm doing my job right in the story that Anne was reading, as she's reading those, you are imagining in your own mind what it would be like to walk into a room of high-ranking generals, the long conference table that exists there, and what it would be like to be the lowest-ranking person in the room about to speak. Not that I have to tell you that you might feel nervous or the way that people sort of arrange those seats. You already start putting your own experiences into that place. And truthfully, it doesn't matter what the actual conference room looked like that we were sitting in, because it's better if you imagine a conference room that you have previously sat in. And now you sit in a chair. You can sort of, I don't tell you what type of chair it is, but you start to imagine what it would be like in a military conference room, what the chairs would be. And you are combining your experiences with my story. And that's what gives power. That is what takes something beyond simply reading facts on a page into something that is literally experienced inside your brain. And you do this through a relatable character. Now, there's a lot of science about the way that stories work in our brain, but this is one of the most important pieces. That when I'm telling you a story that's constructed in the way that I'm going to show you, that includes all of those elements, and you are assuming yourself into the story, your brain doesn't really know the difference between what you are imagining and what is actually happening. Think about this. Have you ever woken up from a dream? And then maybe later in the day, you think of something and you wonder, did I dream that? Was that real? Or was that something that was just in my dream? There's this really thin veil between those two pieces of our brain. And stories take advantage of that. When I tell you a compelling story about a relatable character, and you imagine yourself in that place, your brain, and neuroscience has shown through different functional magnetic resonance imaging studies, that your brain is lighting up in the same places that mine lights up as I'm telling the story. And it's the power of creating that simulation inside your brain that makes the story stick. If I tell you a story, you're more likely to remember it and more likely to include it in your own catalog of experiences that you've had than if I just gave you the list of facts. Like, here's the thing that we proposed, and here's what General Dunford said about it. The last one, that the character is meeting obstacles on the way towards achieving a goal. It's those obstacles that provide us the opportunity to learn. So if I could add something onto what Anne had said about the reason about the cave paintings, for instance. If you think about why story is so important to humans, I spent a long time in the Air Force flying, and what we would say is that you will never live long enough to make all the mistakes yourself. You have to learn from the mistakes of others. And the way that you learn from the mistakes of others is through their stories. So every time that I tell you, hey, let me tell you a story about something I learned that changed my life, your brain cannot help but tune into that lesson because you are selfishly listening to see, is there some lesson that I learned that you can now apply into your own experience so that you don't have to experience maybe the same pain, the same setbacks, the same challenges that I faced. Right? Humans are the only creatures on this planet that do that. The only creatures where I can learn from Anne's experience and it makes me stronger. It makes me more effective. My dogs don't do that. My dogs make each of their own independent mistakes and slowly learn. But it's these obstacles that allow us and they give us the places where we can start to learn. We start to talk about the challenges that we face. And the whole time I'm talking about those, you're imagining if you were facing a similar challenge, where a problem got harder than you expected it to be, where the stakes were raised, where you thought you understood the problem, but it got bigger than that, where you were the lowest ranking person in the room talking to someone who was very senior. And all of those obstacles give you a place inside your own brain to say, let me listen to this because there may be some lesson that I can learn and I can apply later. So when you do that, when you tell a story, a complete narrative about a character, these obstacles, and the way to achieving a goal, it sticks, it works, it communicates. Let's go to the next slide real quick. Also, I'm completely open for comments in the chat or in the Q&A there as well. But let's talk about how to actually write a story. So I told you what a story is, but if you want to have a good story, you've got to focus on the change. You have to focus on the transformation. So this is the graphic that I use when I work with my clients and when I write stories myself. It sort of goes through each of the pieces. But let me start at number 4. And when I write a story, that's where I start as well. I start at number 4, the change. I start there for 2 reasons. One is, if I'm not clear on what the point of the story is, what the moment of change was, the thing that separates the way things used to be from the way things are now, I don't have a good story. So I start myself writing at that place. I'll tell the story in chronological order, but when I write, I'm starting at the change. And now I can go through and I can organize what was the change that happened, what led to that being the day that the change was made, and what were the circumstances that sort of brought me to that point. And now when I go back and I start writing the beginning of the story, the only things that I'm going to include in the beginning are either those things that changed or those things that led to that moment of change. The problem I have if I start writing from the beginning chronologically is that I include a lot of stuff that doesn't need to be there because I'm not really clear myself of what the change is going to be. So I put in a lot of extra information that's frankly distracting to the reader, it's distracting to the audience. Now, if I have a great editing team or if I am very disciplined, I'll go back later and I'll take those pieces out. But too often we end up leaving them in because maybe you had a great turn of phrase or some great metaphor that you really fall in love with and it hurts to get rid of it. But if you start in the middle, if you start about writing the change, now you're less likely to include those pieces in there. So now let's talk about all those pieces together. They all center around that peak of change. So when I'm telling a story, when I'm writing a story, I always start with a preamble for 2 reasons. One, I want people to understand that they're about to hear a story because that taps into our psychology. That taps into those ancient pieces of our brain that says, I need to listen to this person because they may have a lesson that will help me in my life. So I need to let them know, hey, a story's coming. And the second one is, I want to tease the change that is going to happen. I want to tease that something big is about to come about, where we talked about the challenge increasing from where we thought we were leaving to now we're leaving earlier than we expected. This is Herculean challenge that is now facing us. I call the preamble the tease and promise. I'm teasing the change and I'm promising a lesson. That also works on our psychology as well, because as soon as I tell you that there's some change that's coming, that there's some lesson that might be there, now your brain starts secreting dopamine. And it's that dopamine that's going to pull us step by step through the story. Dopamine is a seeking chemical. You build up more and more and more of it as you start seeking the solution or seeking the lesson or seeking the meaning of the story. And I want to take advantage of every drop of that. So for my readers, I want to really amp it up in the beginning. And it's that dopamine that's going to do the work of pulling them the rest of the way through the story, as long as I continue to amp that up as we go. All right, so I've done the preamble. It's just a couple of sentences, lets people know a story's coming. That story is going to include a lesson that's important for them. Now, number 2, I talk about life before the change. We talk about how that particular article is talking about how we had been fighting the war before we decided that we were going to leave at that time. We needed to change the way that we were thinking about the problem, for instance. So that's life before. Number 3, I need to talk about these specific challenges. What are those obstacles? What are those complications that were on the way to getting to whatever that goal was that I was trying to achieve at the end? Right, the challenges are what make it worth reading. It's those challenges, particularly if I can speak in terms of the symptoms that my readers might be facing, because now it becomes easier and easier for them to see that problem impacting them and makes them want whatever that lesson is going to be even more. I'll continue to amp up that dopamine. And now we come to the highlight. This is the whole reason that we're doing the story anyway, is because of this change. Don't hide it. I tell people when if I'm writing with them, writing for them, or they're speaking, I'm going to make sure that the change is unmistakable. I will say things like, and then something happened I will never forget. Or, and then there was a surprise that is burned in my brain. Or then something completely unexpected happened. Or then I realized a lesson that changed my life. And what you're doing with those words is you're bringing your reader's attention right back to that moment and telling them, don't miss it. This is what you've been reading the whole time for. Pay attention to this moment. Again, continuing to amp up that dopamine. And now I describe what happened. Why was that moment different? What was the change that happened? And now the rest of the triangle is sort of unwinding that story. We talk about how previously in 3, I had some specific challenge, and now I'm saying why that challenge has gone away. How was I now able to solve that challenge because of that change that happened in point 4? Then I go to 6, and that's the new everyday life. Like, how did the rest of the world turn out? Just bringing the reader back down softly to, and then we all lived happily ever after, or whatever the end happens to be. And then the last one is meaning. Humans look to make meaning through story. I'm just going to deliver it to you. I'm not writing a piece of fiction. I'm not giving you some surprise ending at the end of a movie. I'm trying to teach you some lesson. I'm trying to communicate some idea. So I'm just going to tell you straight out. This story was important to me because I realized this. Or at the end, I was able to discover this thing. What's the lesson? And when you deliver that lesson at the end, now your reader gets that dump of dopamine that's been building up the entire time. Here's the lesson they've been reading for. Here's the lesson they've been waiting on. They get that dump of dopamine. They feel the pleasure not only of having experienced the story and experienced the change and experienced the resolution themselves, but also the real life instance of now you have this new lesson, this new piece of information, this new experience that you can add on to the things that you have experienced yourself to now be able to go through the world. And I do this literally every time that I make a story. I have this triangle here. It's my logo. It's on my shirt. When I work with clients, I send it to them so they can use it as they are practicing telling their story. When you hit these, it just works, delivers. The last thing I'll say on the next slide is, and Anne mentioned this earlier as well, is that you as a writer are doing the work to make it easy for your readers to understand your lesson, to make it easy for them to understand the thing that you were trying to communicate. One person that I talk to a lot, they talk about the law of conservation of work of reading, right, of information. That there has to be some cognitive effort that goes into making meaning and interpreting data and interpreting this lesson. And you can either do it yourself as the storyteller, as the writer, as the presenter, or you can hope that your audience does it. I think the better method is to do it myself, that I can put the information that I want to communicate in a way that's easy to digest, easy to get down, so that my audience just has to read. They just have to read, let their brains do what brains have done for hundreds of thousands of years, and they're going to get the lesson. So, and that's what I have prepared here, but I've got plenty of time for questions or for comments or any further discussion. But I really appreciate the chance to come here and talk about story. It's something I'm passionate about, and it's something that's incredibly powerful. And frankly, we need more of it in the government today. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dan. Terrific, helpful stuff. If I had you on my staff all these years, I would have been winning Pulitzers every single year.
Let's do it.
So I've got a question for you before I take the first question that's come in. And that question is, how do you know when something is a story and when something isn't a story? Because I know what's going through the minds of a lot of people who are listening now as well. But I wanted to talk about something, and it doesn't have all that stuff he said. It's just, it's just about, an interesting clause that, something interesting that came out of a FAR part, or an interesting change in definition in the FAR that actually isn't working the way it should, or something like that. How come, how am I ever going to tell that as a story?
Yeah. So stories are the answer to the question, why? Like, why is the world like this? Why do I believe this? Why is this an interesting part of the FAR? Why is this something that needs to be changed? And if you start there, if you start with asking the why question, there's a story that exists behind it. If it's something that has motivated you enough to write for it, then it's something that matters to you. Why does it matter to you? Why is it important? Why is it important enough for you to spend your time writing about? Why is it important enough for someone to spend their time reading? So you start with that why question. But then you got to dig a little bit, right? You've got to dig to figure out, what is that moment of change? And it could be that it was the moment that you realized that this was a problem, when you realize that things should be differently. Or it may be something that's new and the problem hasn't happened yet. And you have to sort of construct a story around that moment when someone will figure out that it's a problem. What are the types of situations that will lead to that place? But if it's not important enough for it to affect you, then it's probably not something that other people are going to find interesting to read either. If you're not interested enough in it to be able to make it something that's compelling, then your readers are kind of left up a creek, I think.
Nice answer. So somebody's asking me,
Yeah.
how do I choose which articles, or how do we choose which articles to publish in the magazine? And do we invite people to write about different topics? Well, in point of fact, yes. And you're looking at one of the people we invited to write right now. In truth, I spend some time on LinkedIn, where I have assembled a group of just terrific, smart, inquisitive, thoughtful people who I look at and read their stuff, and Dan is one of them. And I have found so much resonance in what he says and in his stories, which if you friend him, you will get to see every single day practically. That I thought, gosh, I really wonder what this guy would say if he were to write a piece for us. Knew it was the leadership issue coming up, and he did the piece that you see there about basically speaking truth to or with power. That is, how do you talk to leaders, and how do you convince them or engage them in what it is that you think or believe or know ought to be done or want to be done. And so that happens with frequency. I am a voracious and very Catholic, if you will, little c reader. I am omnivorous. I read all kinds of stuff all over the place every day. And as an editor of a magazine for this particular professional association, I'm always looking to see if there are people who are making terrific points, bringing up interesting aspects, delving into things in an engaging and important way, who can write for the magazine. We also encourage our members to write for the magazine. So I get stories from all kinds of places. Some of them come over the transom, that is, people submit them in proposals that we've been talking about here today. And not all of those get printed. Some of them do, some of them do not. And part of the reason, though not all the reason, that some don't get, that we don't run some of them, is this: they don't hang together. I don't know the reason why. Maybe the person, as Dan said, just wasn't that compelled by what they were writing about, but they don't begin, they don't have a form, and they don't end. They are just sort of lots of musings sprinkled about. That's not compelling. That isn't going to create an audience connecting with the written product, let alone carrying anything away from it. And as I've said, the alchemy in magazines is the beauty of the image and the pictures and the stories and the charts all working together to give you something that you carry away, not just all being there. There's a goal in mind for every single story that we accept into the magazine. The other bigger problems are when there are questions, when there are problems with accuracy, and or with currency. I mean, if it's about something that's just ancient, we're probably not going to print it. I mean, and if it's wrong demonstrably, it's not going to run either. So Dan, let's talk a little bit more about this story question. I'm sure there are people sort of sitting out there going, what is all this crap about story? Why is she talking about stories? Well, for one reason, that's what we call articles in the trade, as their stories. And the reason is because stories work, right? I'm interested in hearing a bit more from you about, we have a saying, or variations of a saying about writing. You sit in front of used to be sit at the typewriter, now it's you sit at front of the keyboard and screen, and until you sweat blood and the story comes out. I think it's difficult for people to start. when they're writing stories. It's difficult to get to that moment where you know what the change is that you want to write about. Where do those ideas come from for you? How do you help people find those? Because I am certain that there are people that work with you that, are going through that mental grasping process.
Yeah, I mean, so the people that work with me, I spend a lot of time with them to find that story, right? And it's a lot of like questioning and interviewing to pull it out of them to get to that place.
What are you
Yeah.
looking for when you're doing that kind of questioning and interviewing? What are you asking to find?
So the first questions that I ask in the interview is, what do you need this story to do? What is the job of this story? For some people, it's like selling their idea. Some people, it's selling their business. Some people want to get more leads. But for much of what we're doing here, the job is to teach something, is to teach some lesson, or at least to persuade someone to see the world or see this piece of the world from your perspective. So you've got to be clear on what the job is of the story. And then, like for me, if I'm doing it myself, now I go back and I start looking through my catalog of experiences to find like what's an experience that teaches that lesson. So in a very specific publication like yours, like every story is not going to work, right? Every story doesn't work to communicate some idea that's going to be interesting to these readers. So you've got to sort of find the lesson that you're trying to teach, and then you go and you look for the story that will enable you to teach that. The thing about stories is that stories should start with or using stories to communicate should start with something that's a universal truth, something that is very relatable to lots of people. So some of them are easy, right? Like fear or love, or a story of something that's big, and you want to start with that universal truth. And now you demonstrate how that universal truth or that universal transition can work through your very specific examples and your specific experiences. And then your readers expand that back out to their universe and they apply it again. So know what you want to do, find the story that does that. The third, I would say, is that storytelling is a habit. The more you do it, the easier it's going to be to tell a story. And the fourth is I keep my notes app on my phone. And every time I remember a story, I write it down in the notes app, and I will go back and I can now have this little catalog of story starters that remind me of things that I can use later when I need to make something work.
Dan, terrific to have you with us today. I hope you all have gotten a lot out of this, and always feel free to send an email and ask a question. Jody, back to you.
Yeah, and if you go over 2 slides over, you'll have Anne's email address. So if you have any questions about submitting articles for NCMA magazines, go ahead and contact Anne directly. Dan has also been nice enough to put his email here as well in the chat. For those of you who are unaware, NCMA certificate courses help you build your skills and advance your career in specific topics related to the contract management profession. At the end of the program, you will earn 10 CPE CLP credits, along with a certificate of completion and a digital badge you can share on LinkedIn and elsewhere. Our inaugural program will be focusing on U.S. federal contracting fundamentals. It starts at the end of the month, and you can learn more about it and register for it in the NCMA Learning Catalog. On the next slide, please join us in Bethesda, Maryland this December for the Government Contract Management Symposium. This year's symposium shines a light on the front lines of contract management profession. Every GCMS session will feature real-life stories from the field to illustrate how to apply key contracting skills. You can register by Thursday to take advantage of the early bird discount. Next slide. The NCMA bookstore has a variety of materials for everyone, such as the Simbach, desktop guides, study guides, and more. Visit the NCMA bookstore to order your copies today. Then finally, the CPCM, CFCM, CCCM, and CCMA are professional certifications of distinction and carry the respective peers in the profession. Learn more at ncma.org/certifications. Final slide. Okay, everybody. And Dan, do you guys have any closing comments?
Just a thank you to Dan for joining us, and to you, Jody, for helping us run this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you both for your informative session and for sharing your information with our community today. I would thank you all for participation in today's event, hosted by Anne Laurent and Dan Manning, and hosted by the National Contract Management Association. Today's program is copyright 2022 the National Contract Management Association, all rights reserved. This concludes today's program. Thank you, Anne and Dan. Thank you, everyone. We hope you have a wonderful day, and we look forward to seeing you at a future NCMA event.